This is the Balanced Growth Show with Dr. Travis Perry, helping successful business professionals like you achieve balance in their lives.
Welcome to another episode of the Balanced Advisor Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Travis Perry. Today, I get to introduce to you Jim Stackpool. Jim has been in the industry for over 30 years. He's influenced, coached, and consulted advisory firms across Australia and New Zealand. His consulting firm, Certainty Advice Group, coaches, trains, and builds advisory firms seeking to fast track their growth into the new era of advice built upon client value. Jim is growing a community of advisory firms aligned on Australia's only certification mark, advice standard for comprehensive, unconflicted advice, Certainty Advice. Jim, it's a pleasure to have you. I really enjoyed getting to know you on the pre-show. There were so many connections, people that we know, we run in circles with, that I feel like, we're already friends. So I appreciate you for making time to be on the show.
Travis, great to be here, and thanks for the invitation. I very much appreciate it.
Absolutely. I find that our conversation is going to be a little bit different than what listeners are probably used to. We're hearing a lot about advisors in the trenches and what they're struggling with. But from our vantage point, Jim and I do a lot of the same similar types of work for advisors, just in different spots, different places. So as you're listening, as you're a fly on the wall of this conversation, I hope you'll gain perspective of what we're seeing, how we're looking at the industry as two coaches and, advisors really to this industry. So thank you for being here, listeners. And I always like to start this up with, letting the guests tell us, how'd you get here? Jim, take it away. How'd you get to this spot?
Oh, good question, Travis. And my wife asks me that all the time. What are you doing and how did you get here? It's very circuitous. I think it's back in the late 70s when I left school, went to university, stumbled around for a while. And for the first few years of the 80s, I actually was in the computer industry, would you believe? And way back then, the market was dominated by all these hardware suppliers, and I was on the software side. We were making really good and neat little software, and we thought we were pretty good, and we grew a business pretty quickly. But by the end of the 80s, what happened is, despite the growth and all the challenges that comes with that, which I'm sure we'll talk about, we couldn't keep up with the dwindling margins on the hardware as they became more and more competitive and well priced, and people became better educated. And so we quickly saw that no matter how much we were trying to sell our what we call the software, which was really, in our view, the most valuable part of the solution, we were making the margins on the hardware. And along the end of the day, the business didn't survive. We picked ourselves up again, or I picked myself up again. And luckily, very, very luckily, just by a twist of fate and a couple of good mates, I ended up working 3 years with the University of New England down here in Armidale in New South Wales. And we're talking, they picked me up because we used to present our software solutions, because we'd get up in front of people and run not webinars back then, they were actually face-to-face sessions. And because I had ability to get up in front of people and talk about solutions, they picked me up. But when I started to focus on the core content of what the university was lecturing about, it was everything we didn't have, the planning. And so after 3 years with them, and just my desire and urge to be a solo entrepreneur again, I, over 30 years ago, set up this business. And by luck again, I first started focusing on the computer industry, but very quickly turned to start working for some of the big agencies back in the late 80s. And my first Agent as a Business Person course was run in 1989 at a place here in Queensland. And because I could see that the agents back in the 80s were making their money off the hardware, and they were giving away all their software. And having failed that the decade before, I was saying, hey, listen, guys, there's got to be a better way. And so that's how it all started 30 years ago. And since we've been running Certainty Advice Group, helping advisors. I've never been an advisor, simply to get through some of the challenges they face of success, but more importantly, making sure they're valuing exactly what they do, as compared to pricing it on something which they really don't have any control of, which be it someone's product or the amount of hours they may put in. Value is not associated with either of those things. Value is associated by how the client is more confident or has more options or feels more secure as a consequence of the engagement. And that's been my quest and will continue to be until such time I can no longer walk the earth, because I really fundamentally believe there's a huge opportunity for more and more firms to really capture this, what is the essence of value, as compared to linking it to something they can't control. And I also think there's a huge need in the world, because there's more and more uncertainty caused by so many different things. And how do we build a great force of advisors all over the world to help clients make those best possible steps on their own lives?
Yeah. Oh, I think you and I both agree value and values in general are, I think, overlooked a lot. They're given lip service, to kind of quote some pop psychology stuff here that really doesn't give advisors the, I guess, way forward to help their clients the best. Meaning they don't utilize it, even with their own clients. They don't look at their own values enough. And I have found it to, take advisors, if you're watching some video, it takes us away from this idea of balance. And the book Achieving Balance that I wrote, that's how I start off, is all about values, right? What are your individual values? Man, we could apply that to the firm, to your clients. How does this actually translate? And I know that I'm not the only one. You and I are not the only one that like to bang the drum on values. There's a lot of really great coaches and advisors out there that are focusing on it, even created a living just around teaching those principles. I think of Bill Backrack. I think of Santiago, who runs Lumient. I think of all these other, wonderful people in the industry that are doing that. So let's talk about why. Why are values so important to advisors, or why should they be?
I think they're the railway lines on which most relationships either grow or don't. And I think we take them for granted, and therefore it becomes very hard to package. If advisors were sort of in the manufacturing business and they had the raw materials coming in one end, and they would do something in their factory and pump out a finished product at the other end, that visibility might make it a bit easier for them to see the production line. But we have clients turning up at one end with all sorts of complexities and expectations, fears, very shallow beliefs in a lot of areas about what they may need to do with their financial lives. And we're trying to get them to the other end where they're walking out confident, aware, feeling valued, relying upon a new relationship with their advisor, but making much better steps in their lives and feeling it that if my advisor wasn't in my life, it wouldn't be as confident, it wouldn't be as secure, the consequences may be worse. And because it's so intangible, I think it's very hard for us to put some science around, well, how do you put this value on something that's intangible and can change? An advisor at 35 was different to a client at 35, maybe different to a client at 45, 55, 65, 75. And so to our own team, as we start to build teams and work with our approaches to what we value and how we change as well. And whilst I don't think there's huge change with that. And so you're dealing with a very malleable resource, if we can call it that, value. But we're trying to get this consistent, this specific, this methodical approach that in some ways and be commercial as well, to how do we take this raw product of a client that is unconfident or doesn't feel secure or not sure of their options or fearful of their consequences, or there may be some emotion attached to some of the decisions they need to make, and then put them through our machinery, for want of a better word, and get them to the other end where they are more confident and they are more secure and they are less fearful of consequences. But they've been in that time when they're dealing with us, there's this, what is it? And I think core to it is the values we take, the values we respect, the values we identify, and important, then deliver upon it. So we have to make sure we are not just talking about it, and making people have that lollipop moment when they feel good. But then afterwards, it is sustainable and it's retained. And I know I'm not really answering a question, but I'm trying to really pose that. And if I knew, if I knew the answer, I'd probably maybe be a richer man today. But it's just by us talking about it like this and airing it over the podcast like this right now, which hopefully just gets people thinking about, this is tough stuff. But we know something's in there and we'll keep searching for it. And that's our quest. We just keep talking about how do we do that better?
Yeah. How do we do it better? How do we talk about this ethereal, difficult, topic and subject that really is an intangible, and try to relate this to advisors? I love that you bring up this idea of, if we could see it kind of on the production, how this would move through and how this might change advisors' perspectives, if they could see how everything was done and then the end point. This really struck me as a young advisor. I don't talk about this too much on the show, but sometimes I'll bring it up as a young advisor where I, was able to help my mom after my father passed away. I was 26. My father died. I talk about it in the book. But there's so much more to that. Like there was 2 years of me essentially doing all my mom's taxes, doing her budget, paying for everything. Like I ran another household. And as I was doing that as a family member, but also advisor, it brought a whole new perspective of what happens when someone retires, when someone passes away. That was my first experience. And to have that at such a young age absolutely changed my entire perspective as an advisor, what I should be doing and how I should be focusing on, and how values are so important. And that's actually carried me through the rest of my career, so much that I believe that balance really is living your highest priorities, but it's based in what you value. It's not what Travis values. It's not what Jim values that matters. It's what you value. What have you found to be, you help advisors with growth, you help them to improve their business, but why are you focused so much in values? Where is the connection between where value is and growth begins?
Oh, it just works. It just, one of the beauties of working with lots of great people over 30 years is you get a real strong sense of what are those intangible, invisible, but very, very clear themes when you're working with great firms, great advisors, and values, what they value, how they distill that value, deliver upon it, understand the value. It just works. And coming down commercially, we've always had a commercial response that what are the top 20% of the profitability or the productivity or the biggest return advisors, and they've got this innate sense of strong values, and it's as simple as, in some ways, common sense that if you turn up on time, do what you say you're going to do, be grateful, be respectful, those common core values in how we carry ourselves. It just works, and you get through some of life's difficult conversations, difficult times, because you're aligning yourself with a core set of truisms that have been laid down since Adam and Eve, or whenever we look back. It just works. Our issue, and this is something we continually are challenged to, is that most of the advisors we work with, they're good at values, they're good at that innate sense, high emotional intelligence, whatever the indicator is, but they're so good at it, it brings them undone. And I think that's the challenge. They're so good at aligning with value, and they're so good at identifying the value and living their own core values, that more and more people want it, and they attract more clients, they attract team members, and they start this growth until such time they then hit many of the issues you've identified so neatly in your book. They hit what a great writer called Kakadizis, who used to write about the life cycles of business, they hit founder's trap, when they just then get stuck. And as all of us on this earth, our greatest strength is our greatest weakness. As we get so good at helping others with valuable conversations, identifying their values, living by their values, ours come unstuck because we've got this stretch. We want to help people, but sometimes you've got to help yourself before you help others.
No, and I honestly believe that as a principle that yes, we need to pay attention to what it is that we need, whether that happens in a logical before or after, it needs to happen, right? Daily. I talk to so many advisors who know this principle, but they don't do it. I know I need to work out. I know I need to sleep longer.
Yeah,
I know
yeah,
I should spend more time with my kids. I know my wife needs me at home.
yeah, yeah.
What have you seen in this industry? Because they struggle with this. What have you seen that's really moved the needle for these advisors out there listening? I know you're absolutely, this is on your mind. I know it is for a fact. I've interviewed over 500 advisors on this topic. So
Yeah.
I know that this is happening, but curious with your experience, Jim, with all of the work that you've done, the decades of helping advisors, what really moves the needle to get them to take this kind of action?
I think it comes back to the wisdom reading and writing for many years. It's when they're sick and tired of being sick and tired, and then knowing that there's an imbalance. And it's a similar question about when do they start eating healthier and living healthier and changing some of their own. First make the change in ourselves. It has to come to that point where I just can't keep going like this. My original reasons to serve people and be there for people, and it was also then to serve myself. And then when they find this deadly embrace occurs that they can't be all things to all people all the time, they just come to this moment, and it's the 12-step alcoholic curse. Let me first see the change in myself before I try and change others, and admit that I may need to change. And when we stop admitting that we may need to change, and the problem might be how I'm looking at it, it's very, very hard to affect any change. And so I don't have the secret elixir that gets people to say, if you just hire this extra person, or if you just change a different way of doing your pricing, or if you resegment the client base, or if we had a different approach to doing what we call conversation zero, that very first conversation when someone rings up and says, maybe work together. First, they've got to have this set of beliefs before we ever try and bring some frameworks or some skills. But working with someone that wants the quick fix, or quickly give me that, or read that book this weekend, and another one next weekend, and another one the weekend after, yeah, you can spend all your life doing that. But it's firstly finding that trigger or that logical reason over time that says, yeah, okay, I recognize the change may need to be in how I'm looking at the paradigm, or I'm looking at the issue, thinking that it's externalized, when really the greatest change is firstly within our own head.
Yeah. And I think that's, as we look at, you kind of brought up the AA, right? Alcoholics Anonymous. And there's a lot to be said about addiction. Balance, really what I'm fighting is workaholism as an addiction.
Yeah.
I'm not a psychotherapist. I have a degree in psychology and a PhD in family and human development. But I'm not a psychotherapist, so I'm not just using the DSM-5 and trying to diagnose people. However, every single day I see workaholics. Every single day. And what I found a lot of the times is the way that they justify their behavior is something that we refer to as fake balance. Meaning I used to work 90 hours a week. Now I'm only working 70. Okay, good. I'm a strengths-based person, Jim. Like, I believe in, let's focus on what you've done. What's your strength? Let's move forward. Let's help you build on it. I'm not putting people down. By no means I'm making fun of other advisors. However, it's the mindset I'm worried about. The mindset is a justification. It is very much I'm okay doing this because I've improved a little bit and I don't really want to move forward anymore. I'm not saying they all have to work 25 hours a week, take 12 weeks off a year like I do. Those are my values. I value vacation, time with my family, way more than I do value building a business, although it's building just fine. Spending this kind of time. Yeah. That said, do you see this, what I call fake balance out there? Do you see fake balance?
All the time. I'm also a big fan of Dan Sullivan's gap theory, where let's measure backwards. If you're going from 90 hours of workaholism a week to 70, I'd pat that person on the back and say, well done, now let's get to 65. Don't try and measure to the ideal of 40, but you are making progress looking backwards. I also think, Travis, the other key thing, and way back, even 1989, at my first ever workshop, I'm just a planter. I plant ideas, and like yourself. But I think when you're actually particularly working a group, face to face particularly, Zoom hasn't done it for me as much, but and two advisors with similar values and similar history and similar heritage and also similar challenges and frustrations, get the chance to share and hear from each other about how I used to think like that, now I do this. My little trigger then starts those community-based conversations. And what did you do? And what was the outcome? And how did you achieve that? They then get reinforcement. And so hearing it from others and then hearing what other steps others have taken to give them a more solid footing to put their own future steps into, because they're hearing how someone did work 80 hours and now they're down to 40 and they're getting better returns. That really lights up. Wow, what's that mousetrap? How did you do that? Well, I made the change in myself and I realized that I could charge more. I realized I could have less staff and achieve more. Well, how did you do that? Well, I did this, this, and this. Not saying it works for you. And so I think we do have a great need and a great, I think, obligation, you and I, to bring together communities, to plan ideas and let the wisdom in the room mold those ideas and hear how it fits for them. Because I think it's one thing to talk about the theory and they get it and they're nodding, but it's another thing to sit with other practitioners who may be a bit further ahead of them and helping them without telling them do what I did, simply this is what I did. And that sharing, and I think that community-based sharing, no man's an island and no person should try and exist in isolation and try and crack this stuff. We do it as a community of advisory firms. I think that's a really, really powerful element to help people who've got this frustration with a core set of values they're stuck on, but a desired set of values they'd like to live to, helping them get that path by leveraging on others who are on similar paths to them.
Yeah, 100%. And I love that you bring this up. And again, just reiterate, I'm not making fun of an advisor who's making progress at all. As you mentioned, like you pat them on the back, you move forward. Absolutely concerned with the mindset of, yeah, I'm balanced, but not really. Right. It's that getting toward that action. And yeah, I 100% agree with you on that last piece there of you take what you've done and you move forward. When it comes to helping advisors yourself to really gain traction and growth through value, what are the 1, 2, 3 first things that you will typically work with advisors on to help them really understand what values are and how that affects their growth?
I guess one of the first things is accountability to their own values. And so it's who's advising the advisor. And can they actually, as they every day help their clients with plans, do they have even the ability to help themselves with their own plan? And the ability to reflect back, let's sit down and understand what 6 months or 12 months or 18 months or even 2-3 years looks like for you. And are you willing to be held accountable to your greatest potential to live to the values that you want to live towards? And we test that over, well, let's set up a few tasks which may be challenging on some of your current habits, but closer towards your desired values. And let's see how you go for 30 days or 60 days. And that might be small things like recording conversations or starting to take time off or starting to price clients slightly differently or starting to run your team slightly differently. And let's test that. And if after 30 days, not 60 or 90 days, I got too busy, Jim, you never know what happened after we had our call, the sky fell down and I just had to pick it up again personally. And if there's excuses usually after the first 30, 60, 90 days, I was just too busy, it wasn't a good time, now let's do it again. You're getting hints already that they're stuck in this workaholism cloud and they're probably not ready yet to hear our message, or not only to implement our message or their message that they're trying to give themselves. So the first one has to be accountability. The second one has to be everything must be based on improving the best interest of their end client and their teams. And if it's not, we're not going to build a collaborative forward development path. And so just ensuring that is an absolute given, that the only reason I'm driving towards a better outcome for you, the client, and for us as the firm as a consequence, is it's absolutely in their best interest, everything we're suggesting. There can be nothing we're offering that is not fundamentally 100% firstly in the best interest of the client, and then secondarily in the best interest of those serving the client. Otherwise, it's not going to be a sustainable development path. It's going to be something I can get a quick hit, I can make a quick fix, I might be able to make it market advantage for a couple of years, but it will not be sustainable. I won't build a longer term legacy for my business that will continue to pay me. So the first thing is accountability, and the second thing is best interests. I think the third thing is just a willingness to continually improve. The habits we had when we were turning a business over at 300,000 is going to be different to turning a business or a lifestyle at 600. It's going to be different to turning it at $1 million. And even just trying to stay at $1 million, I can't just stay. I can't put a brick on a child. I can't stop its growth. And a business can never really just plateau. It's always, its experience is going to grow, its ability and expertise is going to go, its reputation is going to grow. And so just measuring it on some traditional measures of revenue, for instance, or number of clients, we don't think that's sufficient enough. So this continual growth, the only way to stop it growing is to get out of it. It will continue to grow, and therefore this ability to continually reinvent, that's the third thing, I think, just off the top of my head.
One of the things I noticed is you're talking about those concepts, and I kind of loosely hit on this, the Alcoholics Anonymous, DSM-5, traditional definition of what a workaholic is. We've actually looked at expanding that. I talk about, what I call a traditional workaholic, which is a do-it-all. They're doing everything all the time. And they multitask, they go throughout, they really don't have any clear direction. Then there's one that's called a productive workaholic. So this person actually is organized and they do really well, but they still have no boundaries. And because they have no boundaries, they're still a workaholic, but they're a productive workaholic. And I think that evolution from do it all to workaholic is like, hey, I'm doing a little bit better. I was there in 2005. I was like, oh man, yeah, I am doing everything, right? And I became a productive workaholic. The progression after that is something we call a personal developer. Someone who realizes I'm the problem. I'm it. Like Jimmy, you and I are speaking the same language, but so I'm the issue. I'm the problem. So guess what? We start working on ourselves. But what I found with people with addictions is they go from one addiction to another addiction a lot of the times. Yeah. So instead of just saying, well, gee, I should work on my workaholism, it almost personal development becomes the addiction.
Yeah.
So I have figured out and engineered, and the end of the book, as you've read, talk about the accountability partner as the one who can help you kind of break that addiction.
Yeah.
And say, hey,
I really like that idea, and engaging your life partner and
your spouse, your partner, to be able to help you.
I said that to Anna, my wife, and she said, "What?"
Great. I got you in trouble. So, the funny part is ones that really take that to heart realize, well, we can not only help each other together, but my dissertation, my whole work as a PhD student was focused on, do those who do this, that work together on it, are they better off? Or is it just to help you not be a workaholic? And the answer was, it did both. It did both. Psychologically, your relationship, and even financial advisors, your couples who are on the same page, going the same direction, involved together, they're going to be able to achieve their goals together better than if they didn't. That's the truth. So as I look at this, and I'm looking at the DSM-5, I'm looking at a bunch of, how you relate this to workaholism, I think that there is absolutely a progression here. In addition, there is also a readiness for change that you and I have been touching on. And if there's an advisor who knows, like, yeah, I need to work on my values, I need to reduce some things, they start in basically an oblivious stage where they're not even worried about it. Something happens, they hear someone speak, or they listen to this podcast, like, maybe I should do that someday. Pre-contemplation. Yeah. Well, something happens later in life. Maybe they see their brother get divorced because he was a workaholic. Like, whoa, maybe I should talk to my wife about this. Now they're starting to take action. Maybe I should take more time off so that doesn't happen to me, right? I'm running away from pain. Don't let that happen to me. And before we know it, like you're starting to take action, that's really that third or fourth stage, depending on how you look at it. And then it's the kind of back and forth falling off the wagon until you really are able to say, I beat it. Lots of research on this. I didn't come up with this. Is Prochaska stages of change. There's 5 or 6, depending on how you look at it. But I do believe what you were saying earlier. It's important to know that, hey, wherever you're at, like you can make change. You can move forward.
Yeah, but the accountability piece, the old Ralph Waldo Emerson, our greatest challenge in life is to find someone that can hold us to the potential and values that we so want to aspire to ourselves. That accountability, left to our own, we don't work well isolated. I think there's another issue too, Travis, from our perspective, is that we're in the glory days of financial planning. These are when there is just so much demand. But unfortunately, industry hates a vacuum, and I think it's going to get harder and harder to stay in these days in the workaholic state, continuing to do what we've always done and expecting always to get the returns we've had. And I think the commoditization, we're seeing it out here big time in Australia with laws and legislations and regulations. And to a certain extent, the compliance has gone absolutely ridiculous. But it's indicative of the mood that financial advice and financial planning and the commoditization and separation of what we call quality advice from product advice is expanding at ever increasing rates. Here in Australia, we have nearly, towards the end of this decade, will be $7 trillion, which is not big compared to the US, but it's $7 trillion in pension funds by the end of this decade. And that amount of money amassing is building a lot of commoditization of advice. For what a lot of advisors today are making money from, I think it's going to get harder as the margins. So I think if we stay in our own paradigms about, even though how much we value what we do, if we stay in the paradigms of workaholism and thinking the next staff member or the next change in economy or the next shift in platform or whatever I next turn my shiny bright object and focus onto next will be the best thing for me. But if we're missing the ability to get away and see the commoditization of advice, we may be in danger of the tide goes out and we're just left standing. And that's a fear I have for the industry, because they got into it first and foremost to help people make smart decisions and live their best possible lives. But if they haven't really looked after themselves, they may be needing the ones that need advice.
Jim, I think this is where we end it. I could end this any better than what you just said. This is the differentiating factor. I think the movement is towards being a balanced advisor, where you can literally tell your clients, show your clients what you do, brings them closer to their goals, while you're also doing the same to keep, that as a differentiating factor instead of your fee structure, your education, the alphabet soup behind your name, like all those other things. Because we know, as you mentioned, that the industry hates a vacuum. It's moving. It's always changing. There's the evolution of this industry. And being able to really look at yourself at the end of the day in the mirror and say, yes, I'm a balanced advisor. I am living my best life so I can help others live theirs. I think that's what you and I are both about. Well, I think we are spirit brothers, and I think we get this and how this is really affecting other advisors and why it's our life mission to do that is our career. Thank you for being on the show. Thank you for helping other advisors who are listening to this, who are flies on the wall with following these conversations, to really think of things in a different light, focus on values, focus on what it is that we do well. So I appreciate you. I know you've got a lot of work out there. Definitely connect with Jim on social, follow him on Certainty Advice Group, read his books, connect with him out there. We'll have those links in the show notes. Appreciate your time today, Jim.
Travis, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. Remember, guys and gals out there listening, like, share, subscribe. Let us know how we're doing. Give us a great rating on this podcast if you love it. Share it with someone who may need discussion about values and burnout. And we have had a great time today. Remember that, once again, we always talk about this, but remember to live life on purpose.